Sasha, welcome to Camera Conversations, optimised by Pure Sport. We're ready to go?
Oh, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
And there's so many different ways that we could go with this conversation, but I want to talk about this second channel of yours that suddenly started to grow in prominence, because I think most of the listeners are in the UK, and I feel like you're really tackling something that we're all thinking about when it comes to the UK right now.
Yeah, so I had a main YouTube channel talking about finance where I interjected occasional elements of UK economy, which obviously intertwines with politics and other stuff. And I had a problem where a lot of my international audience did not care for UK economy, and a lot of people who are interested in the UK economy do not care about the world of investing or the stock market. So I decided I'd go and give them a place where they can enjoy the ranting about the UK economy in a dedicated place. Set it up in January. It's not got that many subscribers. I'm only on about 19,000 subscribers, but the videos get a lot of views, more than my main channel at the moment, which is kind of funny.
That is odd, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess just there's a lot of people who want to watch, but they just don't hit the subscribe button. But yeah, the channel is just covering, I guess, macro economy stuff in the UK, the things that people are feeling probably in their own lives, but maybe they get a bit of context as to why maybe they feel the way they feel and what's happening in the broader
explanation world. Potentially.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people just want to discuss it. There's not many people discussing current events from a finance perspective in the UK. I know there's a lot of that type of content over in the US, etc., but not so much here. And the few content creators are either firmly on the politics side of things or very general finance topics. So I thought let's have a place for this kind of stuff.
I find it a real shame that people who are interested in personal finance are not interested in what's going on in the UK. And then I'm also annoyed that people who are interested in what's going on an economic scale for the UK are not invested in personal finance. And I had Andrew Craig on the show a few times now, author of How to Own the World, and a lot of people will be familiar with that book, and he bemoans the lack of engagement that British people in general have with investing and personal finance. So that probably speaks to it there. You've got that kind of two audiences.
And I think the nature of the engagement itself is often very surface level, where people very much enjoy to be outraged at stuff or unhappy with whatever, the status quo, the situation, the political establishment, the current party, the previous party. Not many people want to actually discuss how to make things better practically. Like, what would you actually do in the real world? Not just, let's just make things better. Let's have more money for people who don't have money. I'm like, yeah, I agree with all that kind of stuff. Recently, actually, I've noticed there's been a spate of populist rhetoric on social media, even on like Question Time, etc., of these policies talking about let's tax the rich and that will make everything better. And I'm like, well, can we run the numbers? Can we go through how exactly precisely that would work and how much better would that make the lives of regular people? And if the answer is it wouldn't really, maybe that's not, it sounds good. It'd probably win votes, right? It'll probably win votes with people who feel that it's a zero-sum game, and if they're not doing particularly well, that must mean that somebody else somewhere is stealing all of their money and is doing exceptionally well. And I think when you begin trying to dive a little bit deeper, I find it very interesting. Not many people at the moment do find it interesting. I feel like that conversation should be a lot more popular. People prefer to be outraged without thinking about the solutions.
It's going to take people like you creating the content to bring people on that journey with people. Like, people talking nowadays about influencers, but I prefer to interview people on my podcast that are people of influence. And I think you would fall into that category where maybe somebody stumbles across the video because they're angry, they feel disenfranchised, they feel upset, maybe they've been watching too much Gary Economics, and they stumble upon your channel, and that maybe gives them more of a foundation for why they feel the way they feel. And then the next arm to it is that it gives them some sort of information about what they might do on a personal basis and what might happen on a macro level to change the circumstance. Yeah,
it doesn't get you the popularity points for sure, because if you just blame everyone, and the thing is, here's the bit of honest truth. Like, you sometimes have to play the game a bit, right? So I have to voice my opinion on what's going on and say when I don't like things, and that tends to get a few more people interested in the content. But you try to sprinkle in a bit of here is how things could maybe be better, and maybe over time we can kind of push into. I'm here talking to you, which is great. Maybe we can speak to more and more people and get more people talking about actual real solutions, like real practical solutions that can actually be applied by the government that might actually make things better in the UK, as opposed to populist nonsense that sounds good but doesn't actually have a meaningful application.
These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything and all your problems. Before you jump on the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering the foundations and basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, movement are the real keys. When you do decide to supplement, however, what you choose really does matter. You know I'm a big fan of removing toxins and unnecessary things from your lifestyle, and I ensure that my supplements are free from additives, artificial flavors, and any unnecessary, dirty, toxic fillers. Personally, having seen many professional athletes and top performers utilize their products, I decided to give Pure Sport supplements a go. Their products are built on science-backed information, minimal ingredients, and they do exactly what they're meant to. Whether it's their best-selling ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, their deep magnesium to support with quality sleep, or even their natural testosterone-boosting Tonka Ali, I trust that what they make is developed to care for me and my body. Explore the full range of Pure Sport supplements at the link in the show notes, puresport.co, and use the code CAMBRO10 for 10% off.
One of the biggest things that a podcast like mine and other creators in this quote-unquote self-development space are reeling against in recent years is this movement of trying to be seen to do good rather than doing good. And I think things like a wealth tax or tax the rich or eat the rich falls into that. In the same way we had health at any size with the body positivity movement, which is shown to categorically be scientifically incorrect. And there's a big movement of people now rejecting that and thinking, well, this is just nonsense and rhetoric. Let's have some foundation.
I think the rich people should definitely be paying a lot more in a proportion than poorer people. 100%. They already do. And I think the optimal, like with any metric, you can extrapolate either way and understand that it is not a linear curve where the more you tax, the more revenue you bring in. Because, like, let's say you tax 100%, you're obviously going to bring nothing. Let's say you tax 95%, you're going to bring pretty much nothing. And at the other end, if you don't tax anything, you're also going to bring in no tax receipts. So it is an optimization curve where the objective is not to just keep increasing, but to find where the peak is, right? And I think that's a very simple thing, right? The people talk about the Laffer curve, etc. But despite it being simple, people kind of tend to just ignore the fact. And because it's easier just to blame all problems on the fact that somebody else should be paying more.
It's very easy to grow your in-group by having an enemy and an out-group. And that's been a tactic across political movements for many, many years. Nazi Germany had the Jews, for example. Many other dictators will be able to point to a particular group as the sole problem within the country.
Yeah.
When you have somebody speaking out from an inequality perspective about finance and they just say, oh, it's the rich, it's the super rich. Yes, there's an element of a problem with how much the super rich are potentially paying in some regards, but the rhetoric around tax the rich, we already live in a very high tax environment in the UK.
We do. And sometimes you got to think, it's unpopular, but like, how is the spending being? Because the moment you talk about spending, people say, oh, what do you want to cut? Do you want to cut the NHS? Do you want to cut public services? Do you want to cut welfare? And it's a difficult conversation because you kind of say, well, in some cases, maybe, maybe in some cases, limit some of the benefits. And I know like that there are small little pockets that you can tackle, but I think there's a lot of optimization which does not necessarily have to have the Elon style sledgehammer approach of, let's just fire everybody in this department. Nobody needs national parks. Have you ever been to national park? I've never been to national park. Fire them. Fire. There are small examples. Like, for example, we have a £20,000 annual ISA allowance in the UK. Which normal regular person on a normal regular salary post-tax can put in £20,000 into their ISA? And if you're a family, that's 2 lots of 20,000, and you have the kids allowance too. The answer is nobody. If you're on a 35, 40,000 median level salary in the UK, there's absolutely no chance that you can use it. Why is that there? It's to benefit people who are wealthy. So in many respects, I do agree with a lot of the narratives around we should maybe be smart about tackling this. This is basically just letting the government not earn a whole load of capital gains tax for no particular reason whatsoever.
Interesting. I hadn't even considered that, because I'm very pro investing, and my ambition is definitely to be maxing out my ISA as often as possible. But like you say, that's an outlier. That limit could potentially be smaller, but I do feel that in a high tax environment, and you and I will definitely address some of the other taxes which we would critique, but capital gains might be one in particular when it comes to investments in stocks and shares that could potentially be higher, because people are investing such a lot of money. I find some of the stuff around crypto quite funny as well, because again, cards on the table, I invest in cryptocurrency and I use it as a speculative asset. I think the fact that it's so speculative, there's almost like an element of like still being punished when you make good gains from it on capital gains.
Well, there is, and there's obviously the fact that it's not cumulative, right? So at every exit point, you are then subject to tax at that point. And with crypto in particular, it's not the sort of thing that people go and buy and then hold for 25 years, typically. Well, typically being
Bitcoin,
it hasn't existed for 25 years. But yeah, so there's definitely I think we generally as a society have maybe swung a little bit far into the fast gains, very, very high returns, especially, and I think there's a few different factors there. So there's the majority of retail investors today started investing for the very first time in 2020, 2021. So we had the lockdowns, people were on furlough, people weren't spending any money on anything because you couldn't. People sat at home. There was the government bailing out some industries and dishing out COVID loans and stuff like that. So people had a bit of cash, employees, and they began investing. And at the same time, we had all the wave of free investing apps, most of which turned out not to be very free. But so everyone began investing. And I think at the same time, we had this relatively unique like bubble happen in 2020, 2021, when companies that were focused on people sat at home, like Peloton on Zoom, absolutely exploded, and everyone began investing in them. And then all the tech stocks absolutely exploded. And I think we have this entire giant generation of young investors, and then crypto exploded, right? So we had the Bitcoin went absolutely bananas, all the other stuff. And I think we have this whole generation of investors who think that this is normal, who like expect this to be normal. And they kind of, they look at you like you're a pessimistic dinosaur if you disagree. And you try to say, that's not going to be how, like, from now for the next 20 years. I'm really sorry, but that's not how, otherwise we're all going to be billionaires. At which point being a billionaire doesn't mean very much, right? I mean, I think there's going to be some very harsh realities that people are going to have to find out about, because it is impossible for stuff to be going up like 200%, 300% a year. There's a lot of people who invest in all the popular stocks, and those specific stocks have all gone up massively in the stock market as well. And people are just so used to it. And
we live in a fast gratification culture as well now as well.
Very much so.
Netflix, you can watch anything you want at the click of a button. I'm of an age where to get on the internet, you had to ask your parents to turn off the phone line so you could dial on and go on MSN and talk to your friends, maybe go on Facebook and Bebo. But nowadays, the access to the internet is so quick. The access to food delivered straight to your door, the convenience of it all is so key. Maybe we've been corrupted from that perspective into wanting immediate returns from our investments too.
Yeah, maybe. And some people will say that is a fundamental shift in everything, which means that maybe from now on, the performance of investments should be higher than it was in the past, because information is so much quicker, and companies are able to scale a lot more quickly with technology and things like that. Unfortunately, I think the same thing was said 20 years ago when we had the dawn of the personal computer and the internet, and like these technologies always come, but the long-term mantra of like growth is a growth in the valuation of cumulative stock market is a function of personal. So it's a function of the cumulative productivity of society.
Yeah, Andrew Craig described it as human progress.
Exactly.
And if you bet against the stock market, you're betting against human
progress.
And
it is natural for humans to get better at stuff over time, more efficient, to be able to produce more things with less resources, automate stuff. So there is always going to be this natural trend for the stock market overall in the long term to go up, because it's a proxy for human productivity growth. But human productivity, even at the moment, it is not growing at a rate of 300 or 400% or whatever. And so I think I risk sounding a bit pessimistic here. I mean, I'm invested in the stock market. I have been talking about this stuff for a little while as well, and on YouTube. I think it's a good thing. I think more people should do it. I just think people need to maybe just measure their expectations down a little bit.
Expectations is a key term there, Sasha. I completely agree with that, and it's just understanding that what some of these stocks, their level of growth is unprecedented, and it's again the whole past performance is not a predictor of future performance, but it is indicative in some ways of people's expectations off the back of that. So if they bought Tesla in 2020 and they rode it all the way to current prices, their expectation is that that's how things always perform.
Exactly.
I've got friends that were in Alphabet, they were in Rolls Royce. These are really well performing stocks, but not indicative of what stocks typically perform like over a 15, 20, 25 year cycle.
And like say with Google, Alphabet, and with Tesla, I've had shares in those for a very long time. Google actually I sold some time ago. But I think a lot of people, you watch people who are into the same stocks that you are, but again, the expectations are just so wild. They're like, oh yeah, next year there's going to be hundreds of thousands of robots who will be automatically manufacturing stuff, and there's going to be this infinite wealth due to AI. Everyone's going to be infinitely wealthy. I'm like, yeah, okay then.
You're more of a realist on these things.
I just think realist definitely, but I'm just baffled by the way that the reasoning on social media is going. Like you go on Twitter, and it's just so irrational. It's almost like hard to actually even have any meaningful conversation on social media. I mean, I know. Like I'm on Twitter. A lot of people hate it, and probably for good reasons, because it is just a cesspit of that people form these cliques, and then they go and big each other up, and they talk each other up, and
echo chambers.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I think it's difficult because when you're trying to be realistic and at the same time positive pro stuff, people just go, oh, you're just a bear or whatever, or you know, if you talk about a specific stock or whatever that you're showcasing, like this is just, the company's great, the stock is completely wild, they're like, oh, you're just salty because you didn't get the massive returns that we all got, and you go, yeah, I never get those returns because I literally will never be invested in a company that is valued at, I don't know, like 1,000 price to earnings or something, right? I will never be in that kind of position. And obviously, there are situations like a company's just broken even, and those metrics don't make much sense. But for a more mature, more established business, when they're being priced at, 100 times price to sales, I've been seeing with several stocks recently, and some of these companies are bigged up to be the biggest, best thing since sliced bread, and I look at it and go, oh, these guys, they just sell like houseware products and stuff. These guys, they sell a data warehousing solution with like a layer on top of that where you can interrogate that data and get learnings from it. Great. Like, is it going to be the thing that changes everything in the world in the future? No.
Is your concern that people investing in these are investing in a bubble?
Certainly in some cases, yeah. And I think the thing is, like, the market can stay irrational for a long time, right? Companies can continue to be overvalued for many years. Companies that are undervalued can continue to be undervalued for a long period of time. So in the eyes of people investing in these types of bubbles, they can tell themselves they're right, and you can and you can tell yourselves you're right, and they'll point fingers and say, well, obviously you are incorrect because you invest in boring stuff. Like last year I invested in airlines. I mean, that was boring. I made 150% on airlines in 6 months, but boring. Nobody cares.
150% though, in the expectations that people had as investors prior to 2020, 2021 would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
How most personal finance books that I read pre that year, were talking about aiming for 8 to 12% per annum, and you eventually ending up with a pot of
8 to 10% is excellent. If any retail investor can get 10% plus per year for 15 or 20 years straight, they are a phenomenal investor. The truth is, most people will not. And it's very easy when you've had a run of 5 years where you're like massively outperforming the S&P 500 and you feel like you're a genius because you went on YouTube and you watched a video and some guy told you that this company is great. You don't know what they do, but they sound great. It's the future, bro. And you go and invest and suddenly your money's up 10x and you're like, yeah. I think a lot of people think that's just going to continue going like that.
The capital gains piece that you shared,
yeah,
I definitely want to keep more of my money that I make from investing, but I appreciate £20,000 as a tax-free limit annually is very, very high. So that's one area of tax that you would like to address.
That's a very small bit. I mean, I was just giving that as an example. I think generally the only way that a country can prosper and do well long term is if there is genuine economic growth, like on a per capita basis. Because everything else is moving papers from over here to over there, or let's be a bit more frugal with our spending. But you go and look at some of the things that people are cutting, and it's like, I was giving examples I think in some of my previous videos where I was like, the cut sounds big because it's got the word million or the word billion, but you talk about it in the context of a regular person on like an average income, and it's the equivalent of like, I don't know, cutting down your Sky subscription to a slightly cheaper package.
Taking movies out.
Probably not gonna like radically change your life or suddenly make you incredibly wealthy and be able to afford things that you previously couldn't afford. The one way that you can do it is by trying to double your income. And the countries that have done extremely well financially are countries which have experienced very strong financial growth. And policies that the government puts in that promote growth is the only way that's going to be. You want people to come to the UK and bring money to the UK to do these things. You want people who are already within the UK to be empowered and to have the right setup and the right infrastructure and the right environment to go and do things that might create the next big company. And I think like we in the UK we're not very good at that, and I think it's not only the governmental policy, which at the moment is definitely going the opposite direction and trying to almost punish people for doing stuff. They've just passed a whole load of laws, like for example, like just came into effect a few months back, where if you submit stuff late to company's house, there's now hefty penalties. If you submit your confirmation statement late, there's a big penalty now. Previously there wasn't. And I kind of get that people should, do what they need to do, but you have like young people setting up a company, don't really know what needs to be submitted when and where, and they miss on the letter. Some of the things you don't get a letter about at all. You just need to go and check, and you forget. And I think it's all these kind of. I'm like, why are you doing it? What is the practical benefit
and paperwork
here?
And red tape is one of the biggest things about the UK, and I guess we're talking about policy there. So let's do that before we maybe talk about culturally. One of the things that you've been railing against is the public perception of national insurance versus the reality of it. Mm-hmm. Let's get into that.
Yeah, so I think people in the UK tend to think about their tax from their own personal perspective, and because the way the tax is broken down, we have the income tax, we have the national insurance, we have the employer national insurance. People feel that income tax is the tax. So if people say, what's your tax rate? Say 20%. The fact that you're paying the national insurance contributions as well, which is pretty hefty,
8%.
Yeah, so people kind of ignore that. Like that's kind of, that doesn't happen. The fact that your employer used to pay like 13.8, now pays 15% national insurance as well. People are like, oh, well, that's the company paying. This is like a magic money tree. If the company can afford to pay whatever, that's not my income. I'm like, it is exactly your income. So if the company employs you, the net cost to them is your salary, the national insurance, your pension contributions, and the cost of providing you with workspace, laptop, etc., all the like subscriptions, whatever you need. That's the cost of hiring you. If there is this 15% over here, that's part of the cost of hiring you. And in a different world, if this stuff was more logical and simplified, you could have a gross salary which includes that 15% and just one level of income tax. The problem is that system would then immediately become significantly more transparent, and people would realize that we in the UK have tax rates that are over 50% at the in the popular middle segment at the margin.
Which people in that segment of the market have no idea that's the case. They assume 20%, as you're saying.
Well, 20% or 40% and 45%.
That's right.
But when you add the other ones, and I know that there are nuances, like for example, what happens if somebody is also drawing a pension, etc. I get that the current system exists in part for that reason, but I think that's a very small part, because you can work in some changes or some allowances or whatever for specific circumstances. But generally speaking, the only reason, in my opinion, that it exists in this way is because, look, they've gone and increased the employer national insurance because they promised they would not increase taxes on working people. And as far as the company is concerned, the cost of paying that person has just gone up because of an increase in tax. So it is exactly the same. So when you get taxed, income tax, what happens? You get money into your bank account and your employer sends the tax to HMRC. When the employer's national insurance goes up, what happens? Exactly the same. Your employer sends a little bit more money to HMRC. So the tax on your employment has just gone up. I think we're going to see some of the ramifications in the next few months with...
Well, you shared already some of the job losses prior to April. And again, not to timestamp this podcast too much, because people will be listening to it at the time and then many months in advance. And that's one of the beautiful things about evergreen content. But there were job losses between January 25 and April 25 before these national insurances increases came in. So now we're into May, and whenever somebody's listening to this, that's only likely to get worse.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of anecdotal data. I speak to a lot of small business owners, you probably do. There's a lot of anecdotal data about people getting hit extremely hard, because people think that just the 13.8% to 15% is a relatively small movement. But then you kind of go and realize, so obviously they moved the boundary at which it starts being paid from 9 to 5. And when you begin realizing that, like, for the employer national insurance contribution, for somebody on an average wage, I can't remember what the number was exactly, but it's like more than doubled, I think. So like,
it's become more expensive to hire and maintain your staff than ever before. And if we're talking about economic growth, again, we know the robots are coming for our jobs, but in order to grow your business, you typically need a bigger team. You need more staff. You need to be able to drive forward. And that is being stumped and stifled by labour's choices.
Well, and obviously we need taxation in order to pay for public services. I think it's good to live in a country where you are not worried about what happens to you if you need medical help. I think it's good that you don't need to have $10,000 in order to have a child, even if you have insurance, right? I think it's good that we have certain social safety nets for people who need them. I'm often accused of being either very strongly right-leaning or very strongly left-leaning by the opposite sides.
Maybe that's because you have nuance.
I'm a big believer that there are good societal reasons why we pay tax, right? It benefits all of us as a society who looks after people when people need. But you need to know where to draw lines, because being infinitely nice to everybody is also impossible. So you have to know, like, where should the line be drawn? And that's the question, because people are like, oh, you just want the rich people to have more money. I'm like, well, no, because there's always an optimal line. And with the taxation, I think we have a situation where when you go in and take into account child benefit, and the way that it all works, and then it gets like taken away, there are people who are actively punished for going and starting to earn over £100,000. It is bizarre. So I haven't really talked about this in a great amount of detail, but I think the way that your personal allowance gets tapered from 100,000, but then on top of that, the benefits that get tapered for families, I think like you only break even in terms of take-home pay at 145. I think I can't remember the exact number.
I don't know from a child benefit perspective, but I know that the worst salary you can earn is about 120 grand.
Yeah.
Because between 100 and 120, there's no upside really, and your effective rate of tax before we consider some other things is about 62%.
Yeah.
So you're just giving more, like, and no right-thinking human can think it's right to give the state, who spend it terribly in my opinion, more than half of your income.
Yeah, and when you take into account the benefits, you're actually negative. So earning 120, you take home less than if you earn 100. Which
Do you not find it funny though that when somebody talks about earning 120 grand, people online, the kind of blue-haired left-wing brigade, will be like, "Oh, that's so much money." I know loads of people that earn that and are not in insane jobs, but they have a level of authority and they've worked their way up. They've got a level of expertise and mastery in their field, and they've managed to earn a good salary, and they're being pillared from pillar to post by these people.
I mean, it is a good amount of money. In the UK, it is a good amount of money. It is certainly like significantly above the average.
Though, Sasha. It's
and it depends where you live.
Ultra net
it
worth.
depends where you live. Like in London, for example, it probably doesn't go quite as far as if you live somewhere in the middle of nowhere, right? But having said that, going back to the growth agenda thing, there are many people who will go and start small businesses, who will start a franchise, a shop, a small online business or whatever. They will be borrowing money personally on credit cards, on loans, whatever, to try to make this business succeed. They will be pulling in like crazy hours, working evenings, weekends. Their ambition is that at some point in maybe 5 or 10 years time, they will be able to earn like 100,000. They previously had the job that was paying them 30 and they were struggling to make ends meet. They've gone all in. When they get there, to the promised land, the small tiny fraction of them who succeed, because there's a whole huge element of luck involved, you get there and then, oh, wait a second, like the tax rates are so nuts that it's actually almost not worth trying to earn more money. As in, you have people who, for example, earn 60, 70, 80,000, and the tax rates progressively in this up to 145, 150, then it loosens up a little bit. But it almost stops being worth. So the difference between, say, somebody who is earning 80,000 and 120 or 130,000 is maybe in some companies, obviously depends on your sector and industry, but like a manager or senior manager versus some kind of head of or maybe a director or something. And to get to that level, you will need to go and do a lot of extra stuff. You'll have to spend a lot of hours. And if the incremental return is not very much financially, like, is it actually worth your time doing that?
If we discourage people from progressing, then that can only be bad for the overall culture and progress of the country as well.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest bugbear, as you're saying there. We would love people to who earn 60 or 70 to be like, yes, I want to go for the head of department role, or I want to take on the directorship because it's going to earn me more money, it's going to feel good, it's going to be a progressive thing. But if somebody runs the numbers and they see that the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then people start to coast. Mm-hmm. And we have an economy at the moment that is coasting overall.
And over the last, I'd say like 8-9 years, this problem has exacerbated all the way down the pay scale, where today the median salary, depending on how you quantify it and where you look and stuff, but around about £37,500. Today, if you are working a full-time week on minimum wage, on the new minimum wage starting from April, and you're working, say, like 40 hours a week, like a proper job, you're on 26-ish. So that gap has closed so much where you can go and do like a job that doesn't require any training, that doesn't require any previous experience, that doesn't require you to invest any of your actual brain capacity. You can maybe go like be doing some kind of stacking, whatever, listening to stuff. It doesn't matter. And you can earn 26, or you can work really hard and get to the median, which is the point at which 50% of the country earned that or less. And that's, relatively speaking, not that much more. And so I think it just incentivizes people from wanting to make progress, because like, what's the benefit? What's the upside?
Minimum wage, as you're talking about there, is much like the wealth tax. It sounds good in theory to increase
100%, yeah.
But the second and third order consequence effects of it are extremely negative. I think it's increased something like 60% over the last 10 years.
Yeah, even more.
But 10% in the last year. And this will make me extremely unpopular if this gets clipped for TikTok with the left wing brigade. But some jobs are not worth £11 an hour. And that is the reality of the situation. And I at 16 or 17 when I had my first job, like I think it was like £3 or £4 or something like that, right? But that was what I was worth to the labour market, and I was able to get the experience which in the future would arm me with the ability to be able to interact with adults, to be able to be a bit more mature and progress towards earning a salary or getting into a job that was paid more. Whereas nowadays, to give somebody that first experience of in the workplace is more expensive for an employer than ever before, and it's going to discourage that. And I think we've got something like in Scotland, we've got something like 800, 900,000 not in education, not in active employment, whatever the term is. That is a real issue.
Yeah, and I think it's a difficult subject because you're right. A lot of people will go and listen to the one point you're trying to make, and they're like, "Oh, you just don't want people on low wage to be able to earn more. You're a horrible person." And I think that the simplest way to think about it, from my perspective, is think about it like if you've got to look at the situation, like the thing that's happening, the cause, and then the actual outcome, not the perceived or the simple outcome, but like minimum wage has increased significantly. Do the people who earn the minimum wage today, are they able to afford more things to pay their bills and stuff in terms of real quantifiable like lifestyle things, spending power, than they did say 20 years ago? The answer is no. Like people who were on relatively low wages 20 years ago, 25 years ago, would occasionally be able to go on like a summer break somewhere, and those were relatively cheap that you could get in. And the problem is you push the wages up and it sounds good, but if that person can then no longer afford stuff, it's a bit like, so I've got a young son, and he likes Monopoly as a game, and he thought that it would be way more fun to go and create custom money which had way more zeros than the regular Monopoly money. But that custom money can still like only buy exactly the same houses and hotels and stuff. It's just you just add a load more zeros to it, but the net effect is the same, right? Does that make you richer if you have coupons that have a lot more zeros on them? If the net thing that you can buy with them is exactly the same? It isn't. And it's a very difficult topic because like the theory is simple, but trying to genuinely get your head around it is not so simple. Because trying to explain to people that artificially pushing the minimum wage significantly faster than all the other wages actually compresses the pay schedule. Like the difference between what an average person,
a median paid job and the minimum wage, that gap closing is a bad thing for society as a whole.
Yeah, because it disincentivizes people to take on better jobs that require more time and personal
training,
time spent on
education,
training, etc. It makes everything significantly more expensive in terms of, because a lot, service jobs, or when you're trying to get cheap goods where the majority of the cost is manual labor, whether that's transportation or putting the thing out on the shop shelf or whatever, the price of all of those goods significantly increases when minimum wage goes up. And sure, the person doing it gets paid a higher amount of money, but then they just have to fork it out for paying more money for the same goods.
They're able to do less with that money than they would have done previously, because that money is almost artificial now.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's back to it's rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. It's kind of like, does enforcing through legislation to increase the minimum wage mean that people are more likely to set up successful companies in the UK? Does it create new industries? Does it make people go and take on a risk which they previously would not have done? Does it allow the UK to maybe try to go and create the next Google or Netflix or whatever? If the answer is no, then you're not creating new wealth for the country. You're not creating new jobs, new opportunities, new supply chains that feed into those mothership industries. And I think it's just the focus is in the wrong place. The US is not necessarily a beacon of perfection. Those guys haven't changed the minimum wage, and I have no idea how it's at $7, whatever, right? And economically speaking, they are doing significantly better over the last 20 years than the UK. The poorest state in the US. So in 2007, the wages in the UK and the US were roughly commensurate. A lot of other metrics were roughly similar. Today, the poorest state in the US, Mississippi, has higher wages than the UK. And I think and obviously like taxes there are actually a little bit lower. And sure, the price of many things in the US is higher too, and they have to pay insurance, which is basically just separating out. So, they pay less tax, but then they have to pay medical insurance. We combine them into a single tax, which includes medical insurance. But net, the purchasing power is higher because many goods and products are global. Your subscription to Netflix is like the same as their subscription to Netflix-ish. Your basic goods made in China cost the same. So the purchasing power is higher. And what's happened? How come the average person or the median person, the majority of people suddenly earn a lot more money without the government legislating anything? The answer is they've had economic growth. They've had new industries pop up.
And that's what we want here as well.
Yeah.
If you're new to the podcast, make sure you've hit the subscribe or the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on so I can keep getting fantastic guests just like this one. I'm no fan of the previous Conservative administration. I think they sold out to the kind of globalist agenda and really pushed us off a cliff, and Labour are forcing us to hurtle down that cliff really quickly. But I want to share one of your tweets with you in the audience just now that I screenshotted. There's a reason why Elon Musk, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs all succeeded in the US and nobody did the same in the UK. If you set up the right conditions, the right infrastructure, the right incentives and the right mindset, great things can happen. The UK is too busy shooting themselves in the foot, passing idiotic laws and punishing anyone for trying to start a business. That's exactly what we're speaking about there, where if we can create the right conditions, the right infrastructure, the right incentives and that mindset piece, which I'm sure we'll get on to just now, there is room for the UK to grow. But at this moment in time, there's a lot of self-sabotage.
Yeah, and I think we also, on top of all the tax and government and legislation issues, we definitely, and I say we, I mean, like obviously I wasn't born here. I spent most of my life in the UK. But I feel like as a country, we definitely suffer a little bit from, that Britishness of sort of being too, I don't know what the word is, polite or too coy, like not wanting to talk. Cautious maybe, like people don't want to talk about how much they earn. It's like a sort of taboo subject. If somebody wants to start a business, people close to them will often try to talk them out of doing it because it's risky. You don't want
risk
to take on a risk.
Sasha, that's where we're going with this, aren't we?
Yeah, very risk averse as a society. Say in the US and some Asian countries, taking on a risk that might go and turn up trumps is celebrated. It is like encouraged, and failure is part of it. Like maybe you'll fail 3 or 4 times and then you'll win. In fact, most people who succeed will first fail a few times. You just don't know about the failures typically, and
you get the iceberg moment.
Yeah,
it breaks through the surface and you become aware of it, but you don't see all the stuff that went on behind the scenes. And I guess iceberg's one, but then like the whole bamboo shoot's the other analogy people use a lot.
And that bit is probably culturally a little bit more difficult to overcome because it's just the nature of the beast. But perhaps if we turn around as a country and say, look, we want maybe some of this, I'm going to be very careful with how I put this, but maybe some of the similar long-term objectives of what Trump wants for the country, in terms of we want lots of booming industries in different sectors. We want people to come to the UK to do business as opposed to us being just our own little service economy buying everything. Definitely not in the way, in any way that the current White House administration is doing it. But there are ways of doing it that can be fruitful.
There's a reason people voted for him beyond just the policy. The rhetoric and the idea of make America great again and a great place to do business and a great place to live is very attractive. And that's why I'm politically homeless, and I have some hopes for reform, although they're not quite delivering on that at the moment, that they will try and use some of that rhetoric and hopefully tie it in with policy too, which we'll find out in due course.
Yeah, I find it difficult. I hate politics because it's so tribal, and you have to subscribe. Like the way it seems to work is you have to subscribe to one particular fan club, and then you have to agree with every single thing that fan club says. So you can't say, I like these policies these guys have, and I think these ones are really bad, and with these ones, this is okay, this is awful. Like, you're not allowed that. In politics.
I spoke to a gentleman called Zubi a couple of times in the podcast, and he said that you have to swallow the beliefs.
Who do you say, Zubi?
Zubi, yeah, he's really good on X actually.
We studied maths together in the same year at Oxford.
He was at Oxford, yeah.
We actually sat really close in the auditorium. In the it's like what was it called? I can't remember. Like a dinosaur kind of museum thing that had a lecture hall at the back.
Auditorium.
Yeah.
Great guy. So Zubi's massive on X. He's very outspoken. He was very outspoken during the C19 period, and I got quite close to him during that. And I was in Dubai March last year, and we managed to do one in person after doing one on StreamYard the year before. And Zubi was saying that people swallow people's beliefs, cow's bone and all. Whereas in an ideal world, we should maybe be like, I'm going to have the rump or that cut of that person's belief, that part of the steak, rather than just eating the cow, bones and all. And that's the case with politics at the moment, where, for example, I might agree with some of the discussion around immigration and safety that Reform are talking about, but I don't quite understand what their policy is for business and for red tape. Yeah. But then, maybe the Liberal Democrat, unlikely, but maybe the Liberal Democrats are saying something sensible about this, or probably not.
And it's difficult because the political system is set up in a way where you have to have 100% of one, and you just have to pick which one is most preferable based on the pros and cons. I don't have a good solution because I'm not a politician, and this is the reason I hate politics, because it's just it's not conducive. Like people form a specific policy, and then people will prefer to dance and keep pushing the narrative. Because doing a U-turn or rethinking things or saying, oh, actually, that's a good idea, that's seen as weak and like bad leadership or bad politicking. I don't know. And politicians don't do it. And I just think, like, show me anyone who runs any reasonable business who will not listen to something and say, oh, I didn't think of that.
They will make a change in the face of evidence.
Why didn't we do that?
Yeah. From an economic perspective then, you spent a lot of time creating an emergency budget, which you were saying, Rachel from accounts, you're open to copy this if you'd like, and you can take the credit for it. What were some of the proposals in there that you think would lead to the UK having a more economic growth focus?
I think the tax system, the personal taxation system, needs to be simplified significantly. We already talked about that. I think the corporation tax and other taxes that are business taxes can all be geared towards people wanting or being encouraged to try to start something up. So I think some of the examples I gave was, if a company wants to be genuinely like UK based in the sense that their actual HQ with actual senior exec leadership, not like fake Ireland HQ for Google,
Although their economy is improving a lot recently.
Well, because they're getting a lot of backhand money from big people who like to pay little corporation tax. But go and give them a dedicated lower rate of corporation tax, because that would actually encourage companies to be genuinely based in the UK, and maybe companies that operate globally or across Europe would then consider the UK as the place to be, as opposed to Luxembourg or Ireland or whatever. Go and look at all the small. So I think a lot of politicians come from a how would I put it politically correctly? A class of people who have never had to have a real, genuine startup, like you and one or two other people without much money trying to make a business kind of startup. And I think it's very difficult for them to maybe relate and understand some of the pressures and the difficulties with doing that. I've been there several times, and I think it's the little things. It's like how does a little startup, for example, get their first office? In London, it's a slightly different situation. There's a lot of co-working spaces. Having said that, a lot of them are quite expensive, even just for a desk, when you don't have much cash to go around. But you're somewhere rural. You live in I don't know, Southend, or you live in Glasgow, or you live in I don't know where, like in Cornwall somewhere. You want to start a business. Getting an office is very expensive. My example, I did a deal with a local farmer. I hire a place on a cow farm. That's my office. Because it's a relatively large space, because it's a derelict building on a cow farm, my business rates are astronomical. I tried to reason with the council. I'm like, I am one guy in a derelict building on a farm, and I'm being charged like more than all the big shops in town. because it's an old barn, like an old cow shed, and no budging, like literally nothing you can do, because computer says no. And it's little things like, so here we have all these disused windmills, old factory buildings with broken out windows. We have, go and look at any rural farm. They have all of these outbuildings that have just been derelict for 25 years. Why can somebody not go and start up an online business there, or a manufacturing business like making soap or making whatever? I don't know. You have to go and pay £1,200 a month in business rates, even if you go and do a good deal on renting the place, because it's available.
It's costs on top of costs.
It's cost on top of costs. It's just endless. You go and you have to pay £1,200 a month for that. You go and hire somebody. There's going to be a whole load of money that's going to be flowing in tax through there, and it's actually quite difficult. Like, for example, I only started my own business after working in banks, financial services companies, and having a reasonably fast career, which is very unusual, right? So I managed to start my own business at 29, I think it was, when I started my strategy consulting business. But that's because I, by that point, already rose to a director level in the city. And most people are not going to be so lucky. And maybe not in a financial position where that's something they can even theoretically entertain, because for most people, if you don't have a salary coming in for 2 or 3 months, you're going to be in real trouble, because paycheck to paycheck is maybe not the word that some people like to describe themselves as, but imagine what happens if you don't get 3 salary payments in a row. What are you going to do? Are you going to be okay? Do you have enough money sitting around?
Very few people are in that position. I mean, I initially became aware of you through Damien, who came on the show. Damien Talks Money, and he spoke about building his emergency fund up, which enabled him to go all in on YouTube and leave his high-paying sales role that he had. And that is not a position that many people are in. It's a position I would encourage many of the listeners to get into if they want to pursue their thing, but that's not the reality for some people.
It's difficult because a lot of people will then spend all the money, spend all the effort, and just luck doesn't happen. Or you might be good at it, but just things don't quite come together, and that happens a lot. Like, that's the majority of people who do startups. Most startups failed not because the person's incompetent or they're not very good, or they didn't try hard enough. It's just circumstance. I think a lot of people do not give enough attribution to the element of luck in the success of businesses early doors, because many businesses that end up being extremely successful are often like days from bankruptcy multiple times in the early stages. Even Tesla, Elon Musk was talking about the same thing, like saying they had a situation where on a Thursday they were panicking in the boardroom because they didn't know how they're going to pay people on a Monday. Like, if you're in a real startup that doesn't have series whatever funding for billions of dollars, that is common. That is what normally happens.
Speaking there about costs, rates, taxes, culturally in the UK, what might we be able to do to try and encourage more people to push forward and try and grow?
That's a good question. The cultural question is probably the one that I do not necessarily have a ready-made good answer. I'm a maths kind of guy. I'm a numbers kind of guy, a data kind of guy. So I can think, as much as I can about that side of things. Culturally, I think it's difficult. I think perhaps if the circumstances were set up so that you can go and start up a business and it is highly encouraged by the government, and you get certain tax breaks, and you get a deferral on paying income tax, and you get some other benefits, and there's an encouragement for you to go and take up places that are vacant and in a rundown state, and make something of them, and maybe make rural businesses come to life again, because over the last, if you take a big step back, people have been migrating into the cities to do work, but it seems bizarre. I know we've had a slight step back from people working from home, but ultimately, like, that long-term trend hasn't really dissipated despite the internet. There's no reason why you can't be doing many businesses located kind of wherever you want, really. Obviously, like, some you require face-to-face interaction, but many do not. And so I think it's, if we design a system where somebody who could, and the thing is, I am not one of those people, because I know there is a danger where people say, you know what, no, not everybody is a natural born entrepreneur. Not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And I agree. Most people probably should not be an entrepreneur, because it is not a way of life that is actually particularly healthy in many ways. You take on huge risks. A lot of the times you fail. You're going to take personal financial risks. You're going to pump personal money into doing this stuff. It's going to have a detrimental effect on your family life. Like, if you think otherwise, like, go and try it. Go and try it. I mean, like you're going to be panicking, like, oh, I've got this massive bill coming on Monday. What am I going to do about it? Because the money is not in the bank and I have nothing coming in. It's, if you have a regular job in a big company, you clock off and you get a business email. I've been there. I've worked in big banks and stuff. You have to sometimes every now and then, maybe you have to work over a weekend or something, but it's just not in the same ballpark. And what we want is the people who can, or the people who want to do it, who are in a position to do it, we want to let them do it, so that then they can employ the majority of the people into higher paying jobs, into, as the company grows and does better, into a successful, fast-growing enterprise where those people can join at a relatively early stage, then become, progress with the company and become the future leaders.
I'm of the same mind as you, Sasha. I think the financial realities in the systematic situation, if that makes sense, has to be in place to enable the culture to shift. Let's have the actual macro factors available, and then the culture can follow. So, for example, as you say, let's remove some of the bureaucracy, red tape, the punitive charges, and give breaks and incentives for people to take the risk to push forward, and those people become employers of other people that go with them as well. And then I guess during the start of this podcast, when we were talking about the tax situation for PAYE employees and the reality of the percentages, that enables the entrepreneurs, because up until this point, of course, I've built the podcast and my sales coaching, but I've worked as a sales director within a business and very much been the entrepreneur running my department as a separate P&L and having the targets and the cost base that comes with that for marketing and stock and operations and warehousing and all that sort of stuff. And I've been responsible for the sales number. But there's come a point where I hit a particular financial threshold where it's actually more advantageous for me to consider being a consultant for that business because of the nature of what was happening for me from a tax perspective. So if we can work on the system for encouraging entrepreneurs, encouraging people who want to work and thrive within businesses to grow and progress, then the UK is going to be in a much better position than it is right now.
Well, we have so many of the ingredients, and it's almost like you need the ruling class to put in place the rules, which takes advantage of resources that are underutilized. And I think that's probably the big, like, there's nothing, you do not need policies to encourage more banks and financial services companies to set up in the city. They're building new skyscrapers every week. You don't need to encourage more financial services startups. Like, they're doing it all by themselves. But you perhaps can go and look at towns in less well-off corners of the country. Go and look at their high streets. Go and look at their business parks where like half of the stuff is empty.
Well, let's talk about high streets. Vape shops, bookies, news agents, and how many barbers do we need? It's in a really. This is very questionable.
In a local town where I live, like another one opened, and it must be, I don't know, like the 12th or 13th in a small town, where it's a typical situation where there's one good one that everyone goes to. And then there are the other 12 that are permanently empty, that you never, ever, ever see a single person inside, that have their nice cars parked outside. And you kind of... It's weird because we all know what's going on. But why are we, as a society, just okay with what's going on and just prefer to kind of look the other way? Like, what... I understand that this might be seen as very right-wing rhetoric, right? But I just look at it and go, we have this... space in the high street where we used to have shops, and we're not ever going to go back to that place. We're not going to ever go back to a place where people are going to go and visit 25 different shops to find an item instead of typing it in on Amazon,
or even go to a large supermarket, which is a conglomerate of that.
So we're not going back there, but are there smarter ways that we can actually make use of that resource? Are there ways that we can encourage almost remote co-working centers, so that people can be more effective and productive than maybe just working from home? Are there government initiatives that can be had around that? Are there, like, what's stopping people from being able to do that? Like childcare, like how can we integrate childcare into this by literally setting it up next door?
On a law and like cultural perspective though, we're turning a blind eye to money laundering. And
yeah,
I don't understand how culturally the UK has allowed that to happen.
Me neither.
And even if we expand upon that, there's shops in the UK where people go in and shoplift and nobody intervenes. And
yeah.
I bemoan the state of the UK from a cultural perspective in that regard.
I don't get it either.
We've got this lawlessness that we know is, like, I would call flagrant. It's like in sight, and we're just letting it slide. And I'm really, like, I'm Scottish. People have a bit of a funny relationship with the UK. Some of them are very pro-Scottish independence, although that number has diminished. And then some are, what I am, I would say, proudly Scottish, but fiercely British as well. And I bemoan the state of the UK when it comes to that sort of thing. And it's definitely worse down here than it is in Scotland, but it's coming to Scotland if we continue to let it. And we've got the empty barber shops. We've got the takeaways that are open for about 2-3 hours a day and are clearly making no money.
But it's bizarre because, so I've run my own business for 11 years. At one point, I don't know if it was random or because our business direction changed, like we got picked out for an HMRC audit, and they went to town. And the best thing about running your own business for me, because previously I've worked with many private equity companies who set things up via the Luxembourg Islands, Cayman Islands, and all the rest of it. I was part of the people setting that stuff up. I know how it works. I could have gone to town. Well, I quite enjoy having a business where everything is whiter than white and pristine, because the moment the HMRC or whoever comes knocking, I can just, like, what do you want? I'll give you everything. And so I did, but it was painful. It was extremely time consuming. Like, I had to spend nights and weekends over 2 weeks just endlessly preparing documents and sending them stuff. And I'm looking at going, so you're doing this to me, but there's, like, I can point you to the 5 shops in my town that I know 100% are money laundering establishments. And why do they exist? You know it, I know it, everybody else knows it. And I don't know whether it's organized crime or what is it, but we all know it. So given the situation, why are we not tackling it? It just baffles my mind.
It's very frustrating, and we've spoken today in the time that we've had together about actionable things the UK can do and make a change from the kind of current direction that they're going. And some of these are immediately obvious to somebody who understands the numbers like you do, who has a really clear economic outlook on what could be a success. And then we have these other things that I think from your tweet you said the UK is too busy shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what that falls under.
What is, we've got these, like, policies where the reporting on companies, the requirement has just gone up, and other little things, like, for example, if you're self-employed, you now have to submit multiple returns a year. Like, that didn't used to be the case. You have to go and pay the amounts due multiple points a year. Like 20 years ago, I'm like, oh, it's great that you want to basically just ensure that the people pay you tax sooner and more of it and stuff like that. But every day that person spends, like, finding documents, sending them to their accountant, or doing the stuff themselves, whatever it is they do, is a day that they're not being productive. And we
want a more productive economy.
And it's a disincentive to somebody starting their own little business. Like, oh, wait a second, I'm going to have to, like, multiple times a year be like, I'm not financially minded. It's going to be expensive for me. I'm going to have to hire someone to do it for me. It's just like, was the system broken before? Were you not collecting a large amount of tax? Like, have you significantly increased the collection of tax as a result of this?
No, the answer is no.
Probably no. Like, how many other countries go and force businesses to pay tax, or private individuals? Like, even if you're normally paid via PAYE, if you get a little bit of extra income from something, like, for example, you referred some people to, I don't know, some websites, and you got your $10 or commission or whatever. Like, Most people probably will not, but if you are a law-abiding citizen and you go and declare it, you know what's going to happen next year? You're going to have to go and submit 2 self-assessments in order to pay the mid-year contribution on stuff that you have not earned,
But
in case you earn it by the end of the year. And I'm like, are you for real? You're charging people tax on stuff they have not earned in case they earn it later in the year? In like, even if you're being paid PAYE. Like, who thought of this?
The bureaucrats in our country are causing a lot of problems, Sasha. I hope that they take the time to listen to content like this and watch your channel, in particular that emergency budget that you pulled together.
I'm just hoping we can reach more people to try to understand some of the issues, because I think, you know, if we're going to identify the problem is we don't have growth in the economy. The economy's been flatlining, and some of the recent numbers, they yo-yo up and down, but generally speaking, we have not grown in the last 6 years, since 2019. I think it was, I can't remember, I looked at the numbers like a month ago and it was like 2.9%. Maybe it's slightly different now, but that's shocking for a 6-year period, right? I mean, that's the sort of growth that you would maybe hope in a decent year and 1 year to happen. And without growth, we're just going to stagnate, and things are only going to get worse. And I think the sooner that we as a society realize that economic growth is the only thing that matters, and a lot of people are like, do you really need growth? Do you really need growth? I'm like, yeah. Like, take a really simple example. Like, 2 people, I like doing this sort of example. 2 people arrive in a forest with nothing. The GDP there is 0, right? One of them's good at hunting, one of them's good at building. So the hunter goes out and does a bit of hunting and hunts food for both of the people, and then the builder goes and builds a house for themselves and a house for the hunter. Suddenly there is an economy going. They exchange their services of building versus gathering food, and there is a GDP there, the sum of the productivity of those people. Then the hunter goes and invests a bit of time figuring out how to make some guns or bows or traps or whatever. The builder goes and invests some time in constructing better tools and automating some of the processing and stuff. Bang, their level of productivity is increased. They can go and get more food. They can have families and feed them for the same amount of time. They can produce like more stuff in there. They can build a school. They can build other public services because they have increased level of productivity. Like, people think of the economy as a zero-sum game. It isn't. Like, this is a very simple example, but that's like, it illustrates like the economy can grow without it necessarily having to take away from somewhere. Everyone can become richer without it having to go from the pocket of this person to the pocket of that person.
We can have win-win situations, and Sasha, I think that's a positive note for us to wrap up on, and a cool analogy that we'll probably get a chance to hopefully go into again when we do a round 2. I'm sure the listeners will be clamoring for it. I've had tremendous fun. I hope you have as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where should the listeners head towards to continue the conversation?
Just look me up, Sasha Yanshin on YouTube. I've got 2 channels, a UK one and a main one.
And you absolutely love LinkedIn, don't you? So I'll link your LinkedIn in the show notes as well.
I prefer not to use it if I can.
Sasha, thanks for coming on, and thank you to you, the listener. I'll be back to speak to you again very, very soon.